Everything, it said, conspired to prosper the queen. It was especially fortunate for her that not one of those on board the Calindian ship survived to become her accuser. Xerxes, they say, in reply to the remarks made to him, observed, "My men have behaved like women, my women like men." There fell in this combat Artabazus, one of the chief commanders of the fleet, who was son of Darius and brother of Xerxes, and with him perished a vast number of men of high repute, Persians, Medes, and allies. Of the Greeks there died only a few, for as they were able to swim, all those that were not slain outright by the enemy escaped from the sinking vessels and swam across to Salamis. But on the side of the barbarians more perished by drowning than in any other way, since they didn't know how to swim. The great destruction took place when the ships which had been first engaged began to fly, for they who were stationed in the rear, anxious to display their valour before the eyes of the king, made every effort to force their way to the front, and thus became entangled with such of their own vessels as were retreating. In this confusion the following event occurred. Certain Phoenicians, belonging to the ships which had thus perished, made their appearance before the king, and laid the blame of their loss on the Ionians, declaring that they were traitors, and had wilfully destroyed the vessels. But the upshot of this complaint was that the Ionian captains escaped the death which threatened them, while their Phoenician accusers received death as their reward. For it happened that exactly as they spoke, a Samothracian vessel bore down on an Athenian and sank it, but was attacked and crippled immediately by one of the Aeginetan squadron. Now the Samothracians were expert with the javelin, and aimed their weapons so well that they cleared the deck of the vessel which had disabled their own, after which they sprang on board and took it. This saved the Ionians. Xerxes, when he saw the exploit, turned fiercely on the Phoenicians. He was ready in his extreme vexation to find fault with anyone, and ordered their heads to be cut off, to prevent them, he said, from casting the blame of their own misconduct upon braver men. During the whole time of the battle, Xerxes sat at the base of the hill called Aigaleus, over against Salamis, and whenever he saw any of his own captains perform any worthy exploit, he inquired concerning him, and the man's name was taken down by his scribes, together with the names of his father and his city. Ariaramnes, too, a Persian, who was a friend of the Ionians, and present at the time whereof I speak, had a share in bringing about the punishment of the Phoenicians. When the rout of the barbarians began, and they sought to make their escape to Phalerum, the Aeginetans, awaiting them in the channel, performed exploits worthy to be recorded. Through the whole of the confused struggle, the Athenians employed themselves in destroying such ships as either made resistance or fled to shore, while the Aeginetans dealt with those which endeavoured to escape down the strait, so that the Persian vessels were no sooner clear of the Athenians than forthwith they fell into the hands of the Aeginetan squadron. It chanced here that there was a meeting between the ship of Themistocles, which was hasting in pursuit of the enemy, and that of Polycrates, son of Creus the Aeginetan, which had just charged a Sidonian trireme. The Sidonian vessel was the same that captured the Aeginetan guard ship off Scirthus, which had Pythias, the son of Iscanous, on board. That Pythias, I mean, who fell covered with wounds, and whom the Sidonians kept on board their ship from admiration of his gallantry. This man afterwards returned in safety to Aegina, for when the Sidonian vessel with its Persian crew fell into the hands of the Greeks, he was still found on board. Polycrates no sooner saw the Athenian trireme than, knowing at once whose vessel it was, as he observed that it bore the ensign of the admiral, he shouted to Themistocles jeeringly, and asked him in a tone of reproach if the Aeginetans didn't show themselves rare friends to the Medes. At the same time, while he thus reproached Themistocles, Polycrates bore straight down on the Sidonian. Such of the barbarian vessels as escaped from the battle fled to Phalerum, and there sheltered themselves under the protection of the land army. The Greeks who gained the greatest glory of all in the sea fight off Salamis were the Aeginetans, and after them the Athenians. The individuals of most distinction were Polycrates the Eginetan, and 2 Athenians, Eumenes of Anagyrus, and Aminius of Pellene, the latter of whom had pressed Artemisia so hard. And assuredly, if he had known that the vessel carried Artemisia on board, he would never have given over the chase till he had either succeeded in taking her, or else been taken himself, for the Athenian captains had received special orders touching the queen, and moreover a reward of 10,000 drachmas had been proclaimed for anyone who should make her prisoner, since there was great indignation felt that a woman should appear in arms against Athens. However, as I said before, she escaped, and so did some others whose ships survived the engagement, and these were all now assembled at the port of Phalerum. The Athenians say that Adimantus, the Corinthian commander, at the moment when the 2 fleets joined battle, was seized with fear, and being beyond measure alarmed, spread his sails and hasted to fly away, on which the other Corinthians, seeing their leader's ship in full flight, sailed off likewise. They had reached in their flight that part of the coast of Salamis where stands the temple of Athena Sciras, when they met a light bark, a very strange apparition. It was never discovered that anyone had sent it to them, and till it appeared they were altogether ignorant how the battle was going. That there was something beyond nature in the matter they judged from this, that when the men in the bark drew near to their ships, they addressed them, saying, Adimantus, while thou playest the traitor's part by withdrawing all these ships and flying away from the fight, the Greeks whom thou hast deserted are defeating their foes as completely as they ever wished in their prayers. Adimantus, however, wouldn't believe what the men said, whereupon they told him he might take them with him as hostages and put them to death if he did not find the Greeks winning. Then Adimantus put about, both he and those who were with him, and they rejoined the fleet when the victory was already gained. Such is the tale which the Athenians tell concerning them of Corinth. These latter, however, don't allow its truth. On the contrary, they declare that they were among those who distinguished themselves most in the fight, and the rest of Greece bears witness in their favour. In the midst of the confusion, Aristides, the son of Lysimachus the Athenian, of whom I lately spoke as a man of the greatest excellence, performed the following service. He took a number of the Athenian heavy-armed troops who had previously been stationed along the shore at Salamis, and landing with them on the islet of Citalaia, slew all the Persians by whom it was occupied. As soon as the sea fight was ended, the Greeks drew together to Salamis all the wrecks that were to be found in that quarter, and prepared themselves for another engagement, supposing that the king would renew the fight with the vessels which still remained to him. Many of the wrecks had been carried away by a westerly wind to the coast of Attica, where they were thrown upon the strip of shore called Colias. Thus not only were the prophecies of Bacchus and Musaeus concerning this battle fulfilled completely, but likewise, by the place to which the wrecks were drifted, the prediction of Lysistratus, an Athenian soothsayer, uttered many years before these events, and quite forgotten at the time by all the Greeks, was fully accomplished. The words were, Then shall the sight of the oars fill Colian dames with amazement. Now this must have happened as soon as the king was departed. Xerxes, when he saw the extent of his loss, began to be afraid lest the Greeks might be counselled by the Ionians, or, without their advice, might determine to sail straight to the Hellespont and break down the bridges there, in which case he would be blocked up in Europe, and run great risk of perishing. He therefore made up his mind to fly, but as he wished to hide his purpose alike from the Greeks and from his own people, he set to work to carry a mound across the channel to Salamis, and at the same time began fastening a number of Phoenician merchant ships together to serve at once for a bridge and a wall. He likewise made many warlike preparations as if he were about to engage the Greeks once more at sea. Now when these things were seen, all grew fully persuaded that the king was bent on remaining, and intended to push the war in good earnest. Mardonius, however, was in no respect deceived, for long acquaintance enabled him to read all the king's thoughts. Meanwhile Xerxes, though engaged in this way, sent off a messenger to carry intelligence of his misfortune to Persia. Nothing mortal travels so fast as these Persian messengers. The entire plan is a Persian invention, and this is the method of it. Along the whole line of road there are men, they say, stationed with horses, in number equal to the number of days which the journey takes, allowing a man and horse to each day. And these men will not be hindered from accomplishing at their best speed the distance which they have to go, either by snow or rain or heat or by the darkness of night. The first rider delivers his dispatch to the second, and the second passes it to the third. And so it is borne from hand to hand along the whole line, like the light in the torch race, which the Greeks celebrate to Hephaestus. The Persians give the riding post in this manner the name of Angarum. At Susa, on the arrival of the first message, which said that Xerxes was master of Athens, such was the delight of the Persians who had remained behind, that they forthwith strewed all the streets with myrtle boughs, and burnt incense, and fell to feasting and merriment. In like manner, when the second message reached them, so sore was their dismay that they all with one accord rent their garments and cried aloud and wept and wailed without stint. They laid the blame of the disaster on Mardonius, and their grief on the occasion was less on account of the damage done to their ships than owing to the alarm which they felt about the safety of the king. Hence their trouble didn't cease till Xerxes himself, by his arrival, put an end to their fears. And now Mardonius, perceiving that Xerxes took the defeat of his fleet greatly to heart, and suspecting that he had made up his mind to leave Athens and fly away, began to think of the likelihood of his being visited with punishment for having persuaded the king to undertake the war. He therefore considered that it would be the best thing for him to adventure further, and either become the conqueror of Greece, which was the result he rather expected, or else die gloriously after aspiring to a noble achievement. So with these thoughts in his mind, he said one day to the king, "Don't grieve, master, or take so greatly to heart thy late loss. Our hopes hang not altogether on the fate of a few planks, but on our brave steeds and horsemen. These fellows whom thou imaginest to have quite conquered us will not venture, no, not one of them, to come ashore and contend with our land army, nor will the Greeks who are upon the mainland fight our troops. Such as did so have received their punishment. If thou so pleasest, we may at once attack the Peloponnese. If thou wouldst rather wait a while, that too is in our power. Only be not disheartened, for it's not possible that the Greeks can avoid being brought to account alike for this and for their former injuries, nor can they anyhow escape being thy slaves. Thou shouldst therefore do as I've said. If, however, thy mind is made up, and thou art resolved to retreat and lead away thy army, listen to the counsel which in that case I have to offer. Make not the Persians, O king, a laughing-stock to the Greeks. If thy affairs have succeeded ill, it hasn't been by their fault. Thou canst not say that thy Persians have ever shown themselves cowards. What matters it if Phoenicians and Egyptians, Cyprians and Cilicians have misbehaved? Their misconduct touches not us. Since then thy Persians are without fault, be advised by me. Depart home, if thou art so minded, and take with thee the bulk of thy army. But first let me choose out 300,000 troops, and let it be my task to bring Greece beneath thy sway." Xerxes, when he heard these words, felt a sense of joy and delight, like a man who's relieved from care. Answering Mardonius, therefore, that he would consider his counsel and let him know which course he might prefer, Xerxes proceeded to consult with the chief men among the Persians, and because Artemisia on the former occasion had shown herself the only person who knew what was best to be done, he was pleased to summon her to advise him now. As soon as she arrived, he put forth all the rest, both counsellors and bodyguards, and said to her, "Mardonius wishes me to stay and attack the Peloponnese. My Persians," he said, "and my other land forces are not to blame for the disasters which have befallen our arms, and of this he declares they would very gladly give me the proof. He therefore exhorts me either to stay and act as I've said, or to let him choose out 300,000 of my troops, wherewith he undertakes to reduce Greece beneath my sway, while I myself retire with the rest of my forces, and withdraw into my own country. Do thou therefore, as thou didst counsel me so wisely to decline the sea fight, now also advise me in this matter, and say which course of the twain I ought to take for my own good. Thus did the king ask Artemisia's counsel, and the following are the words wherewith she answered him. It is a hard thing, O king, to give the best possible advice to one who asks our counsel. Nevertheless, as thy affairs now stand, it seemeth to me that thou wilt do right to return home. As for Mardonius, if he prefers to remain and undertakes to do as he has said, leave him behind by all means with the troops which he desires. If his design succeeds, and he subdues the Greeks as he promises, thine is the conquest, master, for thy slaves will have accomplished it. If, on the other hand, affairs run counter to his wishes, we can suffer no great loss so long as thou art safe and thy house is in no danger. The Greeks, too, while thou livest and thy house flourishes, must be prepared to fight full many a battle for their freedom. Whereas if Mardonius fall, it matters nothing. They will have gained but a poor triumph, a victory over one of thy slaves. Remember also, thou goest home having gained the purpose of thy expedition, for thou hast burnt Athens. The advice of Artemisia pleased Xerxes well, for she had exactly uttered his own thoughts. I, for my part, don't believe that he would have remained had all his counsellors, both men and women, united to urge his stay, so great was the alarm that he felt. As it was, he gave praise to Artemisia, and entrusted certain of his children to her care, ordering her to convey them to Ephesus, for he'd been accompanied on the expedition by some of his natural sons. He likewise sent away at this time one of the principal of his eunuchs, a man named Hermotimus, a Pedasian, who was bidden to take charge of these sons. Now the Pedasians inhabit the region above Halicarnassus, and it's related of them that in their country the following circumstance happens. When a mischance is about to befall any of their neighbours within a certain time, the priestess of Athena in their city grows a long beard. This has already taken place on 2 occasions. The Hermotimus of whom I spoke above was, as I said, a Pedasian, and he, of all men whom we know, took the most cruel vengeance on the person who had done him an injury. He had been made a prisoner of war, and when his captors sold him, he was bought by a certain Panionius, a native of Chios, who made his living by a most nefarious traffic. Whenever he could get any boys of unusual beauty, he made them eunuchs, and carrying them to Sardis or Ephesus, sold them for large sums of money. For the barbarians value eunuchs more than others, since they regard them as more trustworthy. Many were the slaves that Panionius, who made his living by the practice, had thus treated, and among them was this Hermotimus, of whom I've here made mention. However, he wasn't without his share of good fortune, for after a while he was sent from Sardis, together with other gifts, as a present to the king. Nor was it long before he came to be esteemed by Xerxes more highly than all his eunuchs. When the king was on his way to Athens with the Persian army, and abode for a time at Sardis, Hermotimus happened to make a journey upon business into Mysia, and there, in a district which is called Artanius, but belongs to Chios, he chanced to fall in with Panionius. Recognizing him at once, he entered into a long and friendly talk with him, wherein he counted up the numerous blessings he enjoyed through his means, and promised him all manner of favours in return if he would bring his household to Sardis and live there. Panionius was overjoyed, and accepting the offer made him, came presently and brought with him his wife and children. Then Hermotimus, when he had got Panionius and all his family into his power, addressed him in these words: Thou man who gettest a living by viler deeds than any one else in the whole world, what wrong to thee or thine had I or any of mine done, that thou shouldst have made me the nothing that I now am? Ah, surely thou thoughtest that the gods took no note of thy crimes. But they in their justice have delivered thee, the doer of unrighteousness, into my hands. And now thou canst not complain of the vengeance which I am resolved to take on thee. After these reproaches, Hermotimus commanded the 4 sons of Panionius to be brought, and forced the father to make them eunuchs with his own hand. Unable to resist, he did as Hermotimus required, and then his sons were made to treat him in the self-same way. So in this way there came to Panionius requital at the hands of Hermotimus. Xerxes, after charging Artemisia to convey his sons safe to Ephesus, sent for Mardonius, and bade him choose from all his army such men as he wished, and see that he made his achievements answer to his promises. During this day he did no more, but no sooner was night come than he issued his orders, and at once the captains of the ships left Phalerum and bore away for the Hellespont, each making all the speed he could, and hasting to guard the bridges against the king's return. On their way, as they sailed to Zosta, where certain narrow points of land project into the sea, they took the cliffs for vessels, and fled far away in alarm. Discovering their mistake, however, after a time they joined company once more, and proceeded upon their voyage. Next day the Greeks, seeing the land force of the barbarians encamped in the same place, thought that their ships must still be lying at Phalerum, and expecting another attack from that quarter, made preparations to defend themselves. Soon, however, news came that the ships were all departed and gone away, whereupon it was instantly resolved to make sail in pursuit. They went as far as Andros, but seeing nothing of the Persian fleet, they stopped at that place and held a council of war. At this council, Themistocles advised that the Greeks should follow on through the islands, still pressing the pursuit, and making all haste to the Hellespont, there to break down the bridges. Eurybiades, however, delivered a contrary opinion. If, he said, the Greeks should break down the bridges, it would be the worst thing that could possibly happen for Greece. The Persians, supposing that his retreat were cut off, and he, compelled to remain in Europe, would be sure never to give them any peace. Inaction on his part would ruin all his affairs, and leave him no chance of ever getting back to Asia, nay, would even cause his army to perish by famine. Whereas, if he bestirred himself and acted vigorously, it was likely that the whole of Europe would in course of time become subject to him, since by degrees the various towns and tribes would either fall before his arms, or else agree to terms of submission, and in this way his troops would find food sufficient for them, since each year the Greek harvest would be theirs. As it was, the Persian, because he had lost the sea fight, intended evidently to remain no longer in Europe. The Greeks ought to let him depart, and when he was gone from among them, and had returned into his own country, then would be the time for them to contend with him for the possession of that. The other captains of the Peloponnesians declared themselves of the same mind, whereupon Themistocles, finding that the majority was against him, and that he couldn't persuade them to push on to the Hellespont, changed round, and addressing himself to the Athenians, who of all the allies were the most nettled at the enemy's escape, and who eagerly desired, if the other Greeks wouldn't stir, to sail on by themselves to the Hellespont and break the bridges, spake as follows: I've often myself witnessed occasions, and I've heard of many more from others, where men who had been conquered by an enemy, having been driven quite to desperation, have renewed the fight, and retrieved their former disasters. We've now had the great good luck to save both ourselves and all Greece by the repulse of this vast cloud of men. Let's then be content and not press them too hard, now that they have begun to fly. Be sure we've not done this by our own might. It's the work of gods and heroes who were jealous that one man should be king at once of Europe and of Asia, more especially a man like this, unholy and presumptuous, a man who esteems alike things sacred and things profane, who has cast down and burnt the very images of the gods themselves, who even caused the sea to be scourged with rods and commanded fetters to be thrown into it. At present all is well with us. Let's then abide in Greece and look to ourselves and to our families. The barbarian is clean gone. We've driven him off. Let each now repair his own house, and sow his land diligently. In the spring we will take ship, and sail to the Hellespont and to Ionia. All this Themistocles said in the hope of establishing a claim upon the king, for he wanted to have a safe retreat in case any mischance should befall him at Athens, which indeed came to pass afterwards. At present, however, he dissembled, and the Athenians were persuaded by his words, for they were ready now to do whatever he advised, since they had always esteemed him a wise man, and he had lately proved himself most truly wise and well-judging. Accordingly they came into his views, whereupon he lost no time in sending messengers on board a light bark to the king, choosing for this purpose men whom he could trust to keep his instructions secret, even though they should be put to every kind of torture. Among them was the house-slave Sicinius, the same whom he had made use of previously. When the men reached Attica, all the others stayed with the boat, but Sicinius went up to the king and spake to him as follows. I am sent to thee by Themistocles, the son of Neocles, who's the leader of the Athenians, and the wisest and bravest man of all the allies, to bear thee this message. Themistocles the Athenian, anxious to render thee a service, has restrained the Greeks, who were impatient to pursue thy ships, and to break up the bridges at the Hellespont. Now therefore return home at thy leisure. The messengers, when they'd performed their errand, sailed back to the fleet. And the Greeks, having resolved that they would neither proceed further in pursuit of the barbarians, nor push forward to the Hellespont and destroy the passage, laid siege to Andros, intending to take the town by storm, for Themistocles had required the Andrians to pay down a sum of money, and they had refused, being the first of all the islanders who did so. To his declaration that the money must needs be paid, as the Athenians had brought with him two mighty gods, persuasion and necessity, they made reply that Athens might well be a great and glorious city, since she was blessed with such excellent gods, but they were wretchedly poor, stinted for land, and cursed with two unprofitable gods, who always dwelt with them, and would never quit their island, to wit, poverty and helplessness. These were the gods of the Andrians, and therefore they wouldn't pay the money, for the power of Athens couldn't possibly be stronger than their inability. This reply, coupled with the refusal to pay the sum required, caused their city to be besieged by the Greeks. Meanwhile, Themistocles, who never ceased his pursuit of gain, sent threatening messages to the other islanders with demands for different sums, employing the same messengers and the same words as he had used towards the Andrians. If, he said, they didn't send him the amount required, he would bring the Greek fleet upon them and besiege them till he took their cities. By these means he collected large sums from the Carystians and the Parians, who, when they heard that Andros was already besieged, and that Themistocles was the best esteemed of all the captains, sent the money through fear. Whether any of the other islanders did the like, I can't say for certain, but I think some did, besides those I've mentioned. However, the Carystians, though they complied, weren't spared any the more, but Themistocles was softened by the Parians' gift, and therefore they received no visit from the army. In this way it was that Themistocles, during his stay at Andros, obtained money from the islanders, unbeknown to the other captains. King Xerxes and his army waited but a few days after the sea fight, and then withdrew into Boeotia by the road which they'd followed on their advance. It was the wish of Mardonius to escort the king a part of the way, and as the time of year was no longer suitable for carrying on war, he thought it best to winter in Thessaly and wait for the spring before he attempted the Peloponnese. When the army was come into Thessaly, Mardonius made choice of the troops that were to stay with him, and first of all he took the whole body called the Immortals, except only their leader, Hydarnes, who refused to quit the person of the king. Next he chose the Persians, who wore breastplates, and the 1,000 picked horse. Likewise the Medes, the Sacans, the Bactrians, and the Indians, foot and horse equally. These nations he took entire. From the rest of the allies he culled a few men, taking either such as were remarkable for their appearance, or else such as had performed in his knowledge some valiant deed. The Persians furnished him with the greatest number of troops, men who were adorned with chains and armlets. Next to them were the Medes, who in number equalled the Persians, but in valour fell short of them. The whole army, reckoning the horsemen with the rest, amounted to 300,000 men. At the time when Mardonius was making choice of his troops and Xerxes still continued in Thessaly, the Lacedaemonians received a message from the Delphic oracle, bidding them seek satisfaction at the hands of Xerxes for the death of Leonidas, and take whatever he chose to give them. So the Spartans sent a herald with all speed into Thessaly, who arrived while the entire Persian army was still there. This man, being brought before the king, spake as follows: King of the Medes, the Lacedaemonians and the Heracleids of Sparta require of thee the satisfaction due for bloodshed, because thou slewest their king, who fell fighting for Greece. Xerxes laughed, and for a long time spake not a word. At last, however, he pointed to Mardonius, who was standing by him, and said, Mardonius here shall give them the satisfaction they deserve to get. And the herald accepted the answer, and forthwith went his way. Xerxes after this left Mardonius in Thessaly, and marched away himself at his best speed toward the Hellespont. In 45 days he reached the place of passage, where he arrived with scarce a fraction, so to speak, of his former army. All along their line of march, in every country where they chanced to be, his soldiers seized and devoured whatever corn they could find belonging to the inhabitants, while if no corn was to be found, they gathered the grass that grew in the fields, and stripped the trees, whether cultivated or wild, alike of their bark and of their leaves, and so fed themselves. They left nothing anywhere, so hard were they pressed by hunger. Plague, too, and dysentery attacked the troops while still upon their march, and greatly thinned their ranks. Many died, others fell sick and were left behind in the different cities that lay upon the route, the inhabitants being strictly charged by Xerxes to tend and feed them. Of these, some remained in Thessaly, others in Syris of Paeonia, others again in Macedon. Here Xerxes, on his march into Greece, had left the sacred car and steeds of Jove, which upon his return he was unable to recover, for the Paeonians had disposed of them to the Thracians, and when Xerxes demanded them back, they said that the Thracian tribes, who dwelt about the sources of the Strymon, had stolen the mares as they pastured. Here, too, a Thracian chieftain, king of the Bisaltians and of Crestonia, did a deed which went beyond nature. He had refused to become the willing slave of Xerxes, and had fled before him into the heights of Rhodope, at the same time forbidding his sons to take part in the expedition against Greece. But they, either because they cared little for his orders, or because they wished greatly to see the war, joined the army of Xerxes. At this time they had all returned home to him. The number of the men was 6, quite safe and sound. But their father took them and punished their offence by plucking out their eyes from the sockets. Such was the treatment which these men received. The Persians, having journeyed through Thrace and reached the passage, entered their ships hastily and crossed the Hellespont to Abydos. The bridges were not found stretched across the strait, since a storm had broken and dispersed them. At Abydos the troops halted, and obtaining more abundant provision than they had yet got upon their march, they fed without stint, from which cause, added to the change in their water, great numbers of those who had hitherto escaped perished. The remainder, together with Xerxes himself, came safe to Sardis. There is likewise another account given of the return of the king. It said that when Xerxes on his way from Athens arrived at Ion upon the Strymon, he gave up travelling by land, and entrusting Hydarnes with the conduct of his forces to the Hellespont, embarked himself on board a Phoenician ship, and so crossed into Asia. On his voyage the ship was assailed by a strong wind blowing from the mouth of the Strymon, which caused the sea to run high. As the storm increased and the ship laboured heavily because of the number of the Persians who had come in the king's train and who now crowded the deck, Xerxes was seized with fear and called out to the helmsman in a loud voice, asking him if there were any means whereby they might escape the danger. "No means, master," the helmsman answered, "unless we could be quit of these too numerous passengers." Xerxes, they say, on hearing this, addressed the Persians as follows: "Men of Persia," he said, "now is the time for you to show what love ye bear your king. My safety, as it seems, depends wholly upon you." So spake the king, and the Persians instantly made obeisance, and then leapt over into the sea. Thus was the ship lightened, and Xerxes got safe to Asia. As soon as he had reached the shore, he sent for the helmsman, and gave him a golden crown, because he had preserved the life of the king. But because he had caused the death of a number of Persians, he ordered his head to be struck from his shoulders. Such is the other account which is given of the return of Xerxes, but to me it seems quite unworthy of belief, alike in other respects and in what relates to the Persians. For had the helmsman made any such speech to Xerxes, I suppose there's not one man in 10,000 who will doubt that this is the course which the king would have followed. He would have made the men upon the ship's deck, who were not only Persians, but Persians of the very highest rank, quit their place and go down below, and would have cast into the sea an equal number of the rowers who were Phoenicians. But the truth is that the king, as I've already said, returned into Asia by the same road as the rest of the army. I'll add a strong proof of this. It's certain that Xerxes, on his way back from Greece, passed through Abdera, where he made a contract of friendship with the inhabitants and presented them with a golden scimitar and a tiara broidered with gold. The Abderites declare, but I put no faith in this part of their story, that from the time of the king's leaving Athens he never once loosed his girdle till he came to their city, since it wasn't till then that he felt himself in safety. Now Abdera is nearer to the Hellespont than Ion and the Strymon, where Xerxes, according to the other tale, took ship. Meanwhile, the Greeks, finding that they couldn't capture Andros, sailed away to Carystus and wasted the lands of the Carystians, after which they returned to Salamis. Arrived here, they proceeded, before entering on any other matter, to make choice of the first fruits which should be set apart as offerings to the gods. These consisted of divers gifts. Among them were 3 Phoenician triremes, one of which was dedicated at the Isthmus, where it continued to my day, another at Sunium, and the third at Salamis itself, which was devoted to Ajax. This done, they made a division of the booty, and sent away the first fruits to Delphi. Thereof was made the statue, holding in its hand the beak of a ship, which is 12 cubits high, and which stands in the same place with the golden one of Alexander the Macedonian. After the first fruits had been sent to Delphi, the Greeks made inquiry of the god, in the name of their whole body, if he had received his full share of the spoils, and was satisfied therewith. The god made answer that all the other Greeks had paid him his full due, except only the Aeginetans. On them he had still a claim for the prize of Valor, which they had gained at Salamis. So the Aeginetans, when they heard this, dedicated the 3 golden stars, which stand on the top of a bronze mast in the corner, near the bowl offered by Croesus. When the spoils had been divided, the Greeks sailed to the Isthmus, where a prize of valor was to be awarded to the man who, of all the Greeks, had shown the most merit during the war. When the chiefs were all come, they met at the altar of Poseidon, and took the ballots wherewith they were to give their votes for the first and for the second in merit. Then each man gave himself the first vote, since each considered that he was himself the worthiest, but the second votes were given chiefly to Themistocles. In this way, while the others received but 1 vote apiece, Themistocles had for the second prize a large majority of the suffrages. Envy, however, hindered the chiefs from coming to a decision, and they all sailed away to their homes without making any award. Nevertheless, Themistocles was regarded everywhere as by far the wisest man of all the Greeks, and the whole country rang with his fame. As the chiefs who fought at Salamis, notwithstanding that he was really entitled to the prize, had withheld his honour from him, he went without delay to Lacedaemon, in the hope that he would be honoured there. And the Lacedaemonians received him handsomely, and paid him great respect. The prize of valour, indeed, which was a crown of olive, they gave to Eurybiades, but Themistocles was given a crown of olive too, as the prize of wisdom and dexterity. He was likewise presented with the most beautiful chariot that could be found in Sparta, and after receiving abundant praises was, upon his departure, escorted as far as the borders of Tegea by the 300 picked Spartans, who are called the Knights. Never was it known, either before or since, that the Spartans escorted a man out of their city. On the return of Themistocles to Athens, Timodemus of Aphidne, who was one of his enemies, but otherwise a man of no repute, became so maddened with envy that he openly railed against him, and reproaching him with his journey to Sparta, said, "'Twas not his own merit that had won him honour from the men of Lacedaemon, but the fame of Athens, his country." Then Themistocles, seeing that Timodemus repeated this phrase unceasingly, replied, "Thus stands the case, friend. I had never got this honour from the Spartans had I been a Belbenite, nor thou, hadst thou been an Athenian." Artabazus, the son of Pharnaces, a man whom the Persians had always held in much esteem, but who after the affair of Plataea rose still higher in their opinion, escorted King Xerxes as far as the Strait, with 60,000 of the chosen troops of Mardonius. When the king was safe in Asia, Artabazus set out upon his return, and on arriving near Pallene and finding that Mardonius had gone into winter quarters in Thessaly and Macedonia, and was in no hurry for him to join the camp, he thought it his bounden duty, as the Potidæans had just revolted, to occupy himself in reducing them to slavery. For as soon as the king had passed beyond their territory, and the Persian fleet had made its hasty flight from Salamis, the Potidæans revolted from the barbarians openly, as likewise did all the other inhabitants of that peninsula. Artabazus therefore laid siege to Potidæa, and having a suspicion that the Olynthians were likely to revolt shortly, he besieged their city also. Now Olynthus was at that time held by the Bottiaeans, who had been driven from the parts about the Thamaic Gulf by the Macedonians. Artabazus took the city, and having so done, led out all the inhabitants to a marsh in the neighbourhood, and there slew them. After this he delivered the place into the hands of the people called Chalcidians, having first appointed Creobalus of Torone to be governor. Such was the way in which the Chalcidians got Olynthus. When this town had fallen, Artabazus pressed the siege of Potidæa all the more unremittingly, and was pushing his operations with vigour, when Timoxenus, captain of the Scionians, entered into a plot to betray the town to him. How the matter was managed at first I can't pretend to say, for no account has come down to us, but at the last this is what happened. Whenever Timoxenus wished to send a letter to Artabazus, or Artabazus to send one to Timoxenus, the letter was written on a strip of paper and rolled round the notched end of an arrow shaft. The feathers were then put on over the paper, and the arrow thus prepared was shot to some place agreed upon. But after a while the plot of Timoxenus to betray Potidæa was discovered in this way. Artabazus on one occasion shot off his arrow, intending to send it to the accustomed place, but missing his mark, hit one of the Potidæans in the shoulder. A crowd gathered about the wounded man, as commonly happens in war, and when the arrow was pulled out they noticed the paper, and straightway carried it to the captains who were present from the various cities of the peninsula. The captains read the letter, and finding who the traitor was, nevertheless resolved, out of regard for the city of Scione, that as they didn't wish the Scionians to be thenceforth branded with the name of traitors, they wouldn't bring against him any charge of treachery. Such accordingly was the mode in which this plot was discovered. After Artabazus had continued the siege by the space of 3 months, it happened that there was an unusual ebb of the tide, which lasted a long while. So when the barbarians saw that what had been sea was now no more than a swamp, they determined to push across it into Pellene. And now the troops had already made good 2/5 of their passage, and 3/5 still remained before they could reach Pellene, when the tide came in with a very high flood, higher than had ever been seen before, as the inhabitants of those parts declare, though high floods are by no means uncommon. All who were not able to swim perished immediately. The rest were slain by the Potidæans, who bore down upon them in their sailing vessels. The Potidæans say that what caused this swell and flood, and so brought about the disaster of the Persians, which ensued therefrom, was the profanation by the very men now destroyed in the sea of the temple and image of Poseidon, situated in their suburb, and in this they seem to me to say well. Artabazus afterwards led away the remainder of his army and joined Mardonius in Thessaly. Thus fared it with the Persians, who escorted the king to the strait. As for that part of the fleet of Xerxes which had survived the battle, when it had made good its escape from Salamis to the coast of Asia, and conveyed the king with his army across the strait from the Chersonese to Abydos, it passed the winter at Kyme. On the first approach of spring there was an early muster of the ships at Samos, where some of them indeed had remained throughout the winter. Most of the men-at-arms who served on board were Persians or else Medes, and the command of the fleet had been taken by Mardontes, the son of Bagaius, and Artaintes, the son of Artachias, while there was likewise a third commander, Ithametres, the nephew of Artaintes, whom his uncle had advanced to the post. Further west than Samos, however, they didn't venture to proceed, for they remembered what a defeat they had suffered, and there was no one to compel them to approach any nearer to Greece. They therefore remained at Samos and kept watch over Ionia, to hinder it from breaking into revolt. The whole number of their ships, including those furnished by the Ionians, was 300. It didn't enter into their thoughts that the Greeks would proceed against Ionia. On the contrary, they supposed that the defence of their own country would content them, more especially if they hadn't pursued the Persian fleet when it fled from Salamis, but had so readily given up the chase. They despaired, however, altogether of gaining any success by sea themselves, though by land they thought that Mardonius was quite sure of victory. So they remained at Samos and took counsel together, if by any means they might harass the enemy, at the same time that they waited eagerly to hear how matters would proceed with Mardonius. The approach of spring, and the knowledge that Mardonius was in Thessaly, roused the Greeks from inaction. Their land force, indeed, was not yet come together, but the fleet, consisting of 110 ships, proceeded to Aegina under the command of Leotychides. This Leotychides, who was both general and admiral, was the son of Menares, the son of Agesilaus, the son of Hippocratides, the son of Leotychides, the son of Anaxilaus, the son of Archidamus, the son of Anaxandrides, the son of Theopompus, the son of Nicanor, the son of Charillus, the son of Eunomus, the son of Polydectes, the son of Prytanis, the son of Euryphone, the son of Procles, the son of Aristodemus, the son of Aristomachus, the son of Cleodius, the son of Hyllus, the son of Heracles. He belonged to the younger branch of the royal house. All his ancestors, except the two next in the above list to himself, had been kings of Sparta. The Athenian vessels were commanded by Xanthippus, the son of Ariphron. When the whole fleet was collected together at Aegina, ambassadors from Ionia arrived at the Greek station. They had but just come from paying a visit to Sparta, where they'd been entreating the Lacedaemonians to undertake the deliverance of their native land. One of these ambassadors was Herodotus, the son of Basileides. Originally they were 7 in number, and the whole 7 had conspired to slay Stratus, the tyrant of Chios. One, however, of those engaged in the plot betrayed the enterprise, and the conspiracy being in this way discovered, Herodotus and the remaining 5 quitted Chios and went straight to Sparta, where they now proceeded to Aegina, their object being to beseech the Greeks that they would pass over to Ionia. It was not, however, without difficulty that they were induced to advance even so far as Delos. All beyond that seemed to the Greeks full of danger. The places were quite unknown to them, and to their fancy swarmed with Persian troops. As for Samos, it appeared to them as far off as the Pillars of Heracles. Thus it came to pass that at the very same time the barbarians were hindered by their fears from venturing any further west than Samos, and the prayers of the Chians failed to induce the Greeks to advance any further east than Delos. Terror guarded the mid-region. The Greek fleet was now on its way to Delos, but Mardonius still abode in his winter quarters in Thessaly. When he was about to leave them, he dispatched a man named Mies, a European by birth, to go and consult the different oracles, giving him orders to put questions everywhere to all the oracles whereof he found it possible to make trial. What it was that he wanted to know when he gave Mies these orders I'm not able to say, for no account has reached me of the matter, but for my own part I suppose that he sent to inquire concerning the business which he had in hand, and not for any other purpose. Mies, it is certain, went to Labedaia, and by the payment of a sum of money induced one of the inhabitants to go down to Trophonius. He likewise visited Abai of the Phocians, and there consulted the god. While at Thebes, to which place he went first of all, he not only got access to Apollo Ismenius, of whom inquiry was made by means of victims, according to the custom practised also at Olympia, but likewise prevailed on a man who was not a Theban but a foreigner to pass the night in the temple of Amphiaraus. No Theban can lawfully consult this oracle for the following reason. Amphiaraus by an oracle gave the Thebans their choice, to have him for their prophet or for their helper in war. He bade them elect between the two, and forego either one or the other, so they chose rather to have him for their helper. On this account it's unlawful for a Theban to sleep in his temple. One thing which the Thebans declare to have happened at this time is to me very surprising. Mies, the European, they say, after he had gone about to all the oracles, came at last to the sacred precinct of Apollo Ptous. The place itself bears the name of Ptoum. It's in the country of the Thebans, and is situate on the mountainside overlooking Lake Copaeus, only a very little way from the town called Acryphia. Here Mies arrived, and entered the temple, followed by 3 Theban citizens, picked men whom the state had appointed to take down whatever answer the god might give. No sooner was he entered than the prophet delivered him an oracle, but in a foreign tongue, so that his Theban attendants were astonished, hearing a strange language, when they expected Greek, and didn't know what to do. Mies, however, the European, snatched from their hands the tablet which they had brought with them, and wrote down what the prophet uttered. The reply, he told them, was in the Carian dialect. After this, Mies departed, and returned to Thessaly. Mardonius, when he had read the answers given by the oracles, sent next an envoy to Athens. This was Alexander, the son of Amyntas, a Macedonian, of whom he made choice for 2 reasons. Alexander was connected with the Persians by family ties, for Gagea, who was the daughter of Amyntas and sister to Alexander himself, was married to Babares, a Persian, and by him had a son, to wit, Amyntas of Asia, who was named after his mother's father, and enjoyed the revenues of Alabanda, a large city of Phrygia, which had been assigned him by the king. Alexander was likewise, and of this too Mardonius was well aware, both by services which he had rendered and by formal compact of friendship, connected with Athens. Mardonius therefore thought that by sending him he would be most likely to gain over the Athenians to the Persian side. He'd heard that they were a numerous and a warlike people, and he knew that the disasters which had befallen the Persians by sea were mainly their work. He therefore expected that if he could form alliance with them, he would easily get the mastery of the sea, as indeed he would have done beyond a doubt, while by land he believed that he was already greatly superior, and so he thought by this alliance to make sure of overcoming the Greeks. Perhaps, too, the oracles lent this way, and counselled him to make Athens his friend. So it may have been in obedience to them that he sent the embassy. This Alexander was descended in the 7th degree from Perdiccas, who obtained the sovereignty over the Macedonians in the way which I will now relate. 3 brothers, descendants of Temenus, fled from Argos to the Illyrians. Their names were Gauanes, Iropus, and Perdiccas. From Illyria they went across to Upper Macedonia, where they came to a certain town called Libaia. There they hired themselves out to serve the king in different employs. One tended the horses, another looked after the cows, while Perdiccas, who was the youngest, took charge of the smaller cattle. In those early times, poverty wasn't confined to the people. Kings themselves were poor, and so here it was the king's wife who cooked the victuals. Now, whenever she baked the bread, she always observed that the loaf of the labouring boy, Perdiccas, swelled to double its natural size. So the queen, finding this never fail, spoke of it to her husband. Directly that it came to his ears, the thought struck him that it was a miracle, and boded something of no small moment. He therefore sent for the 3 labourers, and told them to be gone out of his dominions. They answered they had a right to their wages. If he would pay them what was due, they were quite willing to go. Now it happened that the sun was shining down the chimney into the room where they were, and the king, hearing them talk of wages, lost his wits, and said, "There are the wages which you deserve. Take that. I give it you," and pointed, as he spoke, to the sunshine. The 2 elder brothers, Gauanes and Iropus, stood aghast at the reply, and did nothing, but the boy, who had a knife in his hand, made a mark with it round the sunshine on the floor of the room, and said, "O king, we accept your payment." Then he received the light of the sun 3 times into his bosom, and so went away, and his brothers went with him. When they were gone, one of those who sat by told the king what the youngest of the 3 had done, and hinted that he must have had some meaning in accepting the wages given. Then the king, when he heard what had happened, was angry, and sent horsemen after the youths to slay them. Now there's a river in Macedonia to which the descendants of these Argives offer sacrifice as their saviour. This stream swelled so much, as soon as the sons of Temenus were safe across, that the horsemen found it impossible to follow. So the brothers escaped into another part of Macedonia, and took up their abode near the place called the Gardens of Midas, son of Gordius. In these gardens there are roses which grow of themselves, so sweet that no others can come near them, and with blossoms that have as many as 6 petals each. It was here, according to the Macedonians, that Silenus was made a prisoner. Above the gardens stands a mountain called Bermius, which is so cold that none can reach the top. Here the brothers made their abode, and from this place, by degrees, they conquered all Macedonia. From the Perdiccas of whom we've here spoken, Alexander was descended in the following way. Alexander was the son of Amyntas, Amyntas of Alcetus. The father of Alcetus was Aeropus, of Aeropus Philip, of Philip Argaius, of Argaius Perdiccas, the first sovereign. Such was the descent of Alexander. And when Alexander reached Athens as the ambassador of Mardonius, he spoke as follows. O men of Athens, these be the words of Mardonius. The king has sent a message to me, saying, all the trespasses which the Athenians have committed against me I freely forgive. Now then, Mardonius, thus shalt thou act towards them. Restore to them their territory, and let them choose for themselves whatever land they like besides, and let them dwell therein as a free people. Build up likewise all their temples which I burned, if on these terms they will consent to enter into a league with me. Such are the orders which I have received, and which I must needs obey, unless there be a hindrance on your part. And now I say unto you, why are ye so mad as to levy war against the king, whom ye cannot possibly overcome or even resist forever? Ye have seen the multitude and the bravery of the host of Xerxes. You know also how large a power remains with me in your land. Suppose then ye should get the better of us, and defeat this army, a thing whereof ye will not, if ye be wise, entertain the least hope. What follows even then but a contest with a still greater force? Do not, because you would fain match yourselves with the king, consent to lose your country, and live in constant danger of your lives. Rather agree to make peace, which ye can now do without any tarnish to your honour, since the king invites you to it. Continue free, and make an alliance with us, without fraud or deceit. These are the words, O Athenians, which Mardonius had bid me speak to you. For my own part, I'll say nothing of the good will I bear your nation, since ye have not now, for the first time, to become acquainted with it. But I'll add my entreaties also, and beseech you to give ear to Mardonius, for I see clearly that it's impossible for you to go on for ever contending against Xerxes. If that had appeared to me possible, I wouldn't now have come hither the bearer of such a message. But the king's power surpasses that of man, and his arm reaches far. If then ye do not hasten to conclude a peace when such fair terms are offered you, I tremble to think of what you will have to endure, you who of all the allies lie most directly in the path of danger, whose land will always be the chief battleground of the contending powers, and who will therefore constantly have to suffer alone. Hearken then, I pray you, to Mardonius. Surely it's no small matter that the great king chooses you out from all the rest of the Greeks, to offer you forgiveness of the wrongs you have done him, and to propose himself as your friend and ally. Such were the words of Alexander. Now the Lacedaemonians, when tidings reached them that Alexander was gone to Athens to bring about a league between the Athenians and the barbarians, and when at the same time they called to mind the prophecies which declared that the Dorian race should one day be driven from the Peloponnese by the Medes and the Athenians, were exceedingly afraid lest the Athenians might consent to the alliance with Persia. They therefore lost no time in sending envoys to Athens, and it so happened that these envoys were given their audience at the same time with Alexander. For the Athenians had waited and made delays, because they felt sure that the Lacedaemonians would hear that an ambassador was come to them from the Persians, and as soon as they heard it, would with all speed send an embassy. They contrived matters therefore of set purpose, so that the Lacedaemonians might hear them deliver their sentiments on the occasion. As soon as Alexander had finished speaking, the ambassadors from Sparta took the word, and said, We are sent here by the Lacedaemonians, to entreat of you that ye will not do a new thing in Greece, nor agree to the terms which are offered you by the barbarian. Such conduct on the part of any of the Greeks were alike unjust and dishonourable. But in you 'twould be worse than in others, for divers reasons. 'Twas by you that this war was kindled at the first among us. Our wishes were in no way considered. The contest began by your seeking to extend your empire. Now the fate of Greece is involved in it. Besides, it were surely an intolerable thing that the Athenians, who have always hitherto been known as a nation to which many men owed their freedom, should now become the means of bringing all other Greeks into slavery. We feel, however, for the heavy calamities which press on you, the loss of your harvest these 2 years, and the ruin in which your homes have lain for so long a time. We offer you, therefore, on the part of the Lacedaemonians and the allies, sustenance for your women, and for the unwarlike portion of your households, so long as the war endures. Be ye not seduced by Alexander the Macedonian, who softens down the rough words of Mardonius. He does as is natural for him to do. A tyrant himself, he helps forward a tyrant's cause. But ye Athenians should do differently, at least if ye be truly wise. For ye should know that with barbarians there is neither faith nor truth. Thus spake the envoys. After which the Athenians returned this answer to Alexander. We know, as well as thou dost, that the power of the Mede is many times greater than our own. We did not need to have that cast in our teeth. Nevertheless, we cling so to freedom that we shall offer what resistance we may. Seek not to persuade us into making terms with the barbarian. Say what thou wilt never gain our assent. Return rather at once, and tell Mardonius that our answer to him is this: so long as the sun keeps his present course, we will never join alliance with Xerxes. Nay, we shall oppose him unceasingly, trusting in the aid of those gods and heroes whom he has lightly esteemed, and whose houses and whose images he has burnt with fire. And come not thou again to us with words like these, nor thinking to do us a service persuade us to unholy actions. Thou art the guest and friend of our nation. We would not that thou shouldst receive hurt at our hands. Such was the answer which the Athenians gave to Alexander. To the Spartan envoys they said, 'Twas natural, no doubt, that the Lacedaemonians should be afraid we might make terms with the barbarian, but nevertheless 'twas a base fear in men who knew so well of what temper and spirit we are. Not all the gold that the whole earth contains, not the fairest and most fertile of all lands, would bribe us to take part with the Medes and help them to enslave our countrymen. Even could we anyhow have brought ourselves to such a thing, there are many very powerful motives which would now make it impossible. The first and chief of these is the burning and destruction of our temples and the images of our gods, which forces us to make no terms with their destroyer, but rather to pursue him with our resentment to the uttermost. Again, there is our common brotherhood with the Greeks, our common language, the altars and the sacrifices of which we all partake, the common character which we bear. Did the Athenians betray all these? Of a truth it would not be well. Know then now, if ye have not known it before, that while one Athenian remains alive, we will never join alliance with Xerxes. We thank you, however, for your forethought on our behalf, and for your wish to give our families sustenance, now that ruin has fallen on us. The kindness is complete on your part, but for ourselves we will endure as we may, and not be burdensome to you. Such then is our resolve. Be it your care with all speed to lead out your troops, for if we surmise aright, the barbarian will not wait long ere he invade our territory, but will set out so soon as he learns our answer to be that we will do none of those things which he requires of us. Now then is the time for us, before he enters Attica, to go forth ourselves into Boeotia and give him battle. When the Athenians had thus spoken, the ambassadors from Sparta departed and returned back to their own country.